So barring a miracle over the next couple of games, Liverpool are going to end this season with the League Cup trophy secured and of course that all-important Champions League qualification. I think if you'd have said at the start of the campaign that that's how things were going to play out, I think most Liverpool fans would have bitten your hands off, particularly on the basis of how last season went. But there's no getting away from the fact really that there's a feeling of disappointment there, and that is because of the position that Liverpool got themselves into. But unfortunately, that recent little dip in form has proven really costly, and seeing them go out of the Europa League and pretty much fall out of the Premier League title race, even though they are mathematically in it. Now, around that period where Liverpool's form really dipped, I think a general consensus formed that the finishing really was the main reason to blame for all that. Now, I didn't fully get on board with that. I do think fatigue was an element in Liverpool's dip. I think the fact that so many players had got through a lot of the football and then other players were coming back and they weren't quite in rhythm, I think that was one of the main deciding factors. But there's absolutely no getting away from that. Even alongside that finishing absolutely was an issue, and maybe Liverpool's front line was a big part of that. Now, I've had a look at the numbers and tried to look deeper into this to examine it, and I've looked at the actual moment, the dip itself, and picked out really 6 fixtures that were decisive in Liverpool really falling away in the challenge. The one that saw them knocked out the Europa League, or the 2 that saw them knocked out the Europa League against Atalanta, and also 4 league games around that really that were decisive. And I think if you do look at these a little bit deeper and look at the underlying numbers, I think you can see that there's evidence there that finishing was an issue, that the forwards were a bit of a problem in that time. I mean, if you look at the total goals scored in that period, just 5, and the opposition get 10 in that period, and then you look at the expected goals and the expected goals against, it tells a completely different story. Now, Liverpool there with almost 15 expected goals accumulated in that period, and somehow they only come away with 5 scored. So that shows you that there's been a real finishing issue. I think the one thing that does tally with my feeling that fatigue was an issue is the expected goals against tally is not particularly good either. At 8.5, it just shows you that they were quite open, and to concede 10 in that situation, okay, maybe they've been a touch unlucky, but really Liverpool, I didn't think they were playing well across the pitch as a whole. But the key takeaway, I think, if you look at those fixtures, is that with that expected goals tally of almost 15 that they clocked up, is Liverpool actually probably could have got away with this. They could have really got away with that terrible period of form if they'd have just come away with the goals that they should have in that period. If the finishing had been slightly better, they could have got away with the fact that they were wide open at times and weren't particularly defending really well as well. So, goals do win you games. Sometimes goals win you games that you don't deserve to. And I think we can see from that run of fixtures and that real poor run of form that was so decisive in Liverpool's season, that with better finishing and just average finishing in that period, not exceptional finishing, it just would have had to hit the average, Liverpool would have come away with better results there, potentially would have been in a title race, still would have been in the Europa League. So really, the finishing issues that Liverpool had around that period had a decisive effect on how the season went. Now, of course, if finishing was an issue in that period alone, you just have to say that it's one of those things that can happen. It's variance, but there's been a debate about whether was that just an unlucky run, or is this something that's a little bit of a feature of Liverpool's play? Is it been a problem for them all season, and yet it's only just come to truly bite them now? So I thought it was worth taking a bit of a deeper look into this. And again, I've got some graphics to show you that I think will give you a better idea of whether this was just poor luck or if this is something that's intrinsic to Liverpool at the moment. I think the first surface level place to look really is in terms of the expected goals. Now, I prefer to strip penalties out of those completely. Obviously, you'll know that penalties are worth around 0.7 expected goals, so sometimes if you get a run of getting a lot of penalties, that can boost your numbers artificially, so strip those out. And so the best place to look is non-penalty expected goals, and I think a good comparison to make is between the 3 title rivals, or they were up until Liverpool kind of dropped out the race, and that is of course Arsenal, Liverpool and Manchester City. Now, if you look at the non-penalty expected goals totals for the 3 teams, you'll see that Liverpool are far and away, they create the most chances or the most shooting opportunities on the basis of that, the most expected or non-penalty expected goals of any of the title rivals with 74.2. So on that surface metric, easily the most dangerous attack. Manchester City coming in next with 66.9, and of course Arsenal there with 64.1. So I think that shows you in theory that Liverpool should have the most dangerous attack. Now, when you add in the actual goals that the 3 teams have scored, now Liverpool of course were top of the non-penalty expected goals what you see, in fact, is that Liverpool have only scored the third most goals. So obviously just 81 from there, 74.2 non-penalty expected goals. Man City 87, and Arsenal the leaders there with 88 goals, even though they were actually the team with the third most non-penalty expected goals. One of the reasons I think for that is obviously their set-piece threat is absolutely massive and doesn't maybe feature in that as much and not as factored into that as much. But also it does show you that even on a very, very surface level, you can see a level of underperformance from Liverpool in that regard. And I think that is kind of quite interesting, really. It shows you that Liverpool have underperformed their expected goals just generally as they did in that run where they were really, the finishing wasn't quite there and the forwards were getting so much criticism. So as I say, I think on the surface level, I think that is really, really interesting. But I do think it's what's most fascinating about this is reflected when you look a little bit deeper into the numbers as well. And I think one of the other measures that I want to look into is sort of non-penalty goals that the teams have scored minus their XG totals. So this gives you a really kind of good idea of, have they underperformed against their expected goals? Have they overperformed? And really gives you an outline of how they're doing against their expected goals, whether they should be doing better or whether they are actually doing a lot worse in terms of the finishing. And again, I think these numbers are really, really instructive. Now, City have the highest overperformance against their expected goals in the league, and that is 11.1. So clearly shows you that if you have in your team better finishes, or you're a little bit more precise in the final third, as we absolutely know that City are really, really good on both those counts, that will give you an overperformance against your expected goals. And City absolutely underline that 11.1 extra goals than in theory they should have scored against their expected goals. I think that it marks them out as an absolutely top team with world-class players. And it's interesting that Arsenal are second by that metric in the Premier League, so 8.9, so just quite a bit actually behind City, but not a million miles behind them. And it shows you that's two really, really top teams with a level of overperformance against their expected goals that really is one of the reasons that marks them out against other teams. But then I think that what makes that fascinating then is that Liverpool minus 4.2 shows a massive underperformance in terms of goals against expected goals. In fact, it's an underperformance that puts them 16th in the Premier League. So the fact that you've got City and Arsenal up there near the top and overperforming their expected goals, and Liverpool so far down, shows you that there's a real difference in terms of the way the two sides finish and the way that they are around the box and how deadly they are, really. And that is a big difference and a marked difference, and shows that Liverpool aren't as clinical. And that's the feeling we all had, isn't it, around that period? Liverpool aren't as clinical as they maybe should be around the box, and that is one of the issues that really reared its head in that bad run of form they went on. So a really interesting comparison against the title rivals. And I think another one that is worth looking at is something called post-shot expected goals. Now, this is a statistic that it considers not just the position you are when you take the shot, but also what kind of placement you put on the shot as well. So it's a really good metric actually for measuring how goalkeepers are doing, because if they overperform against their post shot expected goals, then that shows that they're pulling off a lot of saves that they shouldn't have. It shows that they're essentially a good goalkeeper, because you see a lot of the time that people maybe use saves to rate goalkeepers, but obviously teams that are lower down, their goalkeepers face a lot more shots, so that's not a good metric. But I think that post-shot XG really is, and what you can do with that is you can kind of flip that statistic. So you can look at how goalkeepers performed against their post-shot XG, but opposition goalkeepers. So a good example to sort of maybe explain this is, okay, opposition goalkeepers against Brighton, who we know they're so wasteful in front of goal, they create great opportunities and don't take them. And Brighton ranked worst in the Premier League for this statistic in terms of the opposition goalkeepers post-shot expected goals. So theirs is 11.5, plus 11.5, which means that basically Brighton have scored 11.5 fewer goals than they should have on their post-shot expected goals. So I think using Brighton as an example is really, really good. It shows you that the fact that they're bad at this shows you that kind of we know that they're below average in the finishing, and the fact they're bottom of this really, really kind of explains that. So then when you look at the teams that are in the title race, I think some absolutely fascinating numbers here. Now, City are minus 3.3, so that's ranking opposition, the opposition goalkeeper. So City have scored 3.3 more than they should have against their post-shot XG. So again, shows you they've got some really good finishes in that side. Liverpool minus 0.9, so really, decent finishes there, but they're not doing enough in terms of the finishing. The finishing isn't clinical enough. It's certainly not Man City level, and not ranking particularly highly in that. In fact, they're actually 14th in the Premier League in terms of the ranking for that. Manchester City are 8th. But I think the true outlier here, and the really, really interesting one, is that Arsenal, minus 16.1. So Arsenal have gained basically over 16 goals against their post-shot expected goals. They're by far and away the highest performers in the Premier League in terms of that. Now, that to me is fascinating, shows a real difference in terms of how clinical they are in front of goal versus how clinical Liverpool are. And again, you know, they're bang up there, aren't they, in the title race with Manchester City, and one of their reasons is they maybe don't create as many chances as Manchester City. They're maybe not as good as Manchester City in that regard, and basically who is, they're probably the best team in world football. Well, what they do is they're very, very clinical when they get their opportunities, and nothing can really underline it better than their post-shot expected goals for their opponents being minus 16.1. I mean, the next best is Aston Villa, actually, with minus 8.5, so nobody's anywhere near Arsenal in terms of that. And one thing I think is worth mentioning around that is that models, the models around expected goals, they tend to value crosses, shots from crosses a little bit lower. So maybe the fact that Arsenal is so dangerous from set pieces sort of muddies the numbers a little bit there, because we know how good they are from set pieces. But I still think that shows a level of underperformance that is so high that it just shows that you know, maybe a little bit of fortune, but also being very, very clinical in front of goal. And Liverpool are nowhere near Arsenal in that regard, despite being a side who score quite a decent amount of goals from set pieces, even though they're not as good as Arsenal in that regard. So I just think it shows that there's a real difference between them and Arsenal in that regard, and that has been a big help in keeping Arsenal in the title race and Liverpool absolutely falling away from it, and particularly in that run of form that we spoke about in terms of how they fell away. So it seems that Liverpool are really underperforming. We can see that. We can see that in the general numbers around Liverpool's finishing, but I think the important question to ask is why. And I think the way to maybe look at this is to look at some of the individuals that these two teams have in the sides. And I think, you know, there's some really interesting numbers in terms of this one as well. I think, you know, so what I did to kind of deep dive into the individuals in this is compared the 5 most used forwards for each team. So the 5 forwards that they've got who've played the most minutes, and then measured basically their non-penalty goals that they've scored in the season minus the expected goals. And what that gives you then is a statistic of, okay, their expected goals was this, their actual goals they've scored, have they overperformed or have they underperformed? And again, some really fascinating statistics in this. So of the groups of 5 players that I took from each side, Liverpool have only got one player of their 5 who has overperformed their expected goals, and that is Diogo Jota. He gets the 4.7 there, a massive overperformance, which again, you know, maybe the degree of overperformance is a slight surprise, but I don't think it's a surprise to see Jota there. We know how clinical he is in front of goal. We know he can overperform his XG statistically, or consistently has done that. He is the type of forward who does that really, really deadly when he gets in front of goal. So not a surprise, but the fact is that he's only one who's done that. Liverpool's 4 of the forwards haven't done that. Arsenal have got 2 who've overperformed their XG. Havertz is in there, kind of surprising, with 0.8. Trossard, again, he's a very, very similar player, in my opinion, to Jota, with a huge overperformance there, 3.6. Someone who can strike the ball off both feet, done really, really well to do that. So Arsenal have got 2, and City have 3. Doku 0.7, Bernardo Silva 2.5, and Foden 6.4. So again, it's not just that Liverpool as a whole are underperforming XG or not doing well enough in the finishing. You can see it in the individual forwards they have, that the underperformance, 4 out of 5 forwards are kind of underperforming, or Gakpo is bang on his expected goals. And if you don't get that expected, if you don't get overperformance in that regard, then your finishing is not going to be above average. You're not going to be, you know, you are going to get problems. You are going to run into runs of games like that 6-game run that I spoke about, where your finishing kind of deserts you and you revert to type, and then all of a sudden you're out of the title race, as I say. And I think it's interesting not only that Liverpool have fewer in terms of that are overperforming, they actually have the 2 worst underperformances out of all these 15 players I've compared, and that is Nunez is 4.4 goals below his expected goals tally. Diaz is 3.4 below. Again, you know, you can just see that collective then, the finishing issues that they have, the collective is finishing is underperforming in the finishing, and that is causing Liverpool's issue. So again, you collect the whole five together and see, and there's a general underperformance from Liverpool of 4.5 goals. So they're missing 4.5 goals from the tally that really the numbers expect should be there. City's overperformance of their forwards is 5.5, and Arsenal's just a slight overperformance of 1.2. But again, they're not underperforming; they're doing around where they should be. So it clearly underlines to me that Liverpool are underperforming against XG generally, but the forwards are a little bit of an issue in that, and that is something that people have raised. That didn't they thought that was a surface level concern, but I think it's something that we're really seeing has been underlined by recent performances and the fact that the strikers just haven't performed particularly well this season. Now obviously I've highlighted the issues there, is that Liverpool's finishing hasn't been great. We can see that in the individuals, we can see that in the collective. So the question kind of now is, okay, what's the solution for Liverpool? How did he go about solving this? Now, I think one thing that's interesting maybe to talk about is that it's worth mentioning, and this gets suggested by a lot of people, is that Jurgen Klopp's style of football and the way he plays football is maybe a high volume but low quality chance creation. So it's all a bit of chaos in the box sometimes. It's all about getting there quickly, arriving into space as quickly as you can. They're not maybe as sort of intricate and precise around the box as you would see a Manchester City or an Arsenal, really slow and measured in the possession around the box, trying to create the perfect chance. Liverpool don't really operate in that way. They're all a bit, as I say, it's all about get there really quickly, get into the space, see if you can get a shot away, and that chaos maybe sometimes, as I say, leads to maybe low quality chances being created, and that can be an issue. Of course, that can create issues in your finishing. Your XG could maybe look a bit higher than it actually is in reality, or you're rushing your shot. I think one of the things that might help Liverpool is if Arne Slot comes in this summer, maybe he's a little bit more precise in the final third. We'll have to see that, whether the numbers bear that out, or whether Liverpool do play in that way. But I think it would help if they had a coach who was a little bit more precise around the final third, a little bit more control in that area, and Liverpool will be less rushed in the finishing, better in the finishing, more precise in the chances they create, creating better quality opportunities rather than a high volume of opportunities where the XG adds up to a lot, but in reality they weren't very good chances. I think that's an interesting aspect that Slot can maybe solve. And actually I'd also mention here, it's something I talk about a lot, is maybe a set piece coach as well. Maybe that is, we've seen Arsenal, that overperformance that they've got there. Set piece is no doubt absolutely part of that, and something that the numbers can't always measure. So maybe Liverpool, if they can get a few more goals from corners, a few more goals from free kicks, that can maybe help level out some of the erratic finishing they've got. And again, I think another one that to look into in terms of solutions is the individuals themselves. Now, obviously Darwin Núñez has had a lot of stick recently. He's obviously his finishing has not been great this season, and there's a real chance to get more from him next season. You hope his finishing can level out a little bit, because he doesn't have to be an absolutely prolific, deadly finisher. If his finishing levels out to just kind of average or just slightly below average, his numbers in terms of, because of the shots he gets away, would his numbers for goals would absolutely go through the roof. So it doesn't have to be, he doesn't have to become a perfect finisher. He doesn't have to become Robbie Fowler just to level out, because he's way below average at the moment. The one concern around that is that he's underperformed his expected goals in 4 out of his 5 seasons in Europe. In fact, the only season that he overperformed his expected goals was the season before he moved to Liverpool. So that is a slight concern, but he is young, so we'll have to kind of see whether that levels out a little bit more, whether he sort of just comes slightly closer to his expected goals. Because as I say, he doesn't have to be an unbelievable finisher from nowhere, and I don't think we're ever going to see that. But if he just gets slightly closer to his expected goals, then you'll see that reflected in an awful lot more goals from him, because he does generate the opportunities and the shooting opportunities. That's a massive part of his game. So that is something to keep an eye on, something that Slot can maybe solve around Núñez, and that would be really helpful. Of course, the other potential solution there is, of course, to dip into the transfer market this summer, and that is something I've got no doubt that Liverpool are considering. I mean, in terms of potential solutions there, there's talk about will players leave. Núñez is being spoken about a lot this week in terms of potential departure, but to be honest, I find that hard to imagine at the moment. I think with Darwin Núñez, it's going to be hard to find a club at the moment who's going to pay the money that Liverpool paid to Benfica, or even close to that. There will still be a belief internally at Liverpool that they can get his finishing to just level out, as I say. So and because he's still young as well, it's just worth, I think, pushing it another season and seeing what you can get out of him. So I don't expect that Darwin Núñez will leave this summer. The same with Mohamed Salah. The expectation around Liverpool at the moment is that he will probably at least stay for another season. It would be interesting to see what they do around those contract talks there, and the talk of maybe Mo Salah getting a new contract. But regardless of whether that gets sorted, I expect that Mo Salah will be around next summer. But the one who could leave, the one who could open up a little space, is Luis Diaz. Obviously, there's been links to Paris Saint-Germain, there've been links to Barcelona recently, so there's obviously going to be some interest in him this summer. He's in a period in his contract where it's kind of, well, you either renew or you sell the player, so it's the decision to make for Liverpool around that. And I had heard rumours myself as far back as a year ago, really, that Diaz would consider going back to mainland Europe. He loves Liverpool, loves playing here. But really, the appeal of going back to mainland Europe is something that he would really think about and would really want. And I guess in terms of the climate, you can't argue with him with the way it is most of the time in the UK. So maybe if Luis Diaz was to go, that opens up an opportunity for Liverpool, doesn't it? And I think if he does go, then it gives them a chance to get in someone who's more of a killer. We spoke about Diaz's underperformance against his expected goals. That has been a bit of a feature of his game since he come to Liverpool. He's at an age where you probably don't think he's going to iron that out massively. I don't think he's ever going to be kind of Sadio Mane prolific. And I think the thing is, if you lose Diaz and you bring in someone who is more of a killer, who is more of a finisher, tends to be more prolific, someone who slightly overperforms their expected goals in the way that Diogo Jota does, then I think that really that kind of finisher will rebalance the makeup of that front five. You've got 5 really good options at the moment, but you've only got Salah and Jota as the true killers, and then the rest of them really are a supporting cast who are going to underperform or in and around that area on their expected goals. I think if you swap one of those for someone who's more of a finisher, instantly that front five looks better. And I think the biggest example of that I can think of really is during this poor run that we spoke about that really caused the problems to Liverpool this season, is that when you had Jota injured in that period. I think about the Everton game when he picked up that injury. You lose Jota in that moment, so you've lost one of your killers. Salah's form suddenly dipped out of nowhere, as it had after his injury, and then all of a sudden you were down to just 2 people who put the ball in the back of the net as much as you were expected to, and then the other guys were expected to kind of step up in that situation, and that they're not that type of players. So as I say, I think almost swapping one of that supporting cast out for a finisher completely rebalances how your front five looks. It gives you more killers in that area of the pitch, gets you a little bit closer to either overperforming or getting closer to performing alongside your XG, and I think that would be massively helpful for Liverpool, avoiding a dip like that next season, and just to get close to your XG generally, I think will be much more helpful in terms of staying close to City, staying close to Arsenal if they can keep up that massive overperformance that I spoke about earlier. So I think there's real solutions there and possibilities for Liverpool to sort this problem out, but my take on it would be that I believe Liverpool do need to make some tweaks to the forward line. Hope there's a little bit more to come from the next coach, Arne Slot, as well, and maybe I think that problem can solve itself and Liverpool will have a very, very potent front line again, because it's not really too far away from where it needs to be, but I think a couple of tweaks would really, really help things out, rebalance those forward options, and again make Liverpool an attacking force, which they're not too far away. They're a very good attacking side already, but they can be a little bit better, so that's my solution for that. As ever, interested to hear in the comments from you guys what you think. Who out the forward line would you keep, who would you sell? What do you think Liverpool should do? Do you want to see a little bit more precise attacking play from the new coach? Do you think that's a change? Or do you think they need to sort of rip it up and start again in terms of how this forward line looks? As I say, let me know in the comments. Always interested to hear from you guys. And if you can like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, always a massive help to me in terms of growing the channel. And of course, there's transfer news to come and all that to talk about going into this summer. More videos like this doing analysis as well. So it's a really, really good time to get on board. So I'm going to leave it there. And of course, I will see you guys very, very soon.